Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great honor to be in this most distinguished university, whose origins and roots resonate so deeply with me and have been an inspiration. Today was a magical day, seeing the future generations thinking and being inspired by what the built environment can be. And I hope that this lecture, as lofty as the title may sound, maybe can be a small device to help you think about small, medium, and large ways that we can contribute as architects to this idea of the modernity and the growth of our continent, our nation, our spaces, our homes, our villages. For me, I think 8 years ago, I returned back to Accra, where my father left many years ago when he was a diplomat in Nkrumah's diplomatic corps. And in coming home with my family, it was a long dream for me to return and to open a practice on the continent of the continent of my birth, but also the continent of my ancestors. Architecture for me started not as a desire for form making or the excitement of construction, all of which are very special. But architecture for me is really a conversation about empowering, edifying, and dealing with the injustices that are inherent, of course, in the world, but also in the built environment. For me, growing up as a young person, moving across the world in the 70s and 80s, I felt a world where there was an incredible optimism in the land that I came from, with my parents and the conversations that they were having amongst their elders as young children sitting under the sort of stools or tables where elders were speaking about the future of Africa. But when I went into the world, I realized that there was a disconnect between the world that was forming and the worlds that we inhabited. And very quickly realized that the world of the continent and the knowledge of the continent didn't have the stage that it should have. Today I was speaking with some students in one of the sessions, and one of the most beautiful moments was this idea that they felt that they no longer needed to justify being African architects. And that seems like such a simple thing to say, but 30 years ago that was not easy to say, actually. 30 years ago you had to justify yourself as an architect of color, not an African architect, but an architect of color, by assimilating into the dominant narratives, and that somehow architecture was only produced through the dominant narratives. And that for me was a social injustice. In fact, it was one of the things that spurred my entire career. And it was the fire for me that really has been the fuel, and still is the fuel, to imagining an African future. What I want to show you are about 6 or 7 projects, I think, small to large, and each one being a discourse that starts from the time that we started the office in Accra. This is the second version. In fact, the first version of trying to come to Accra was actually in around 2012, 13, 14, Kofi. And we actually came into Accra very quietly and desperately wanted to be part of the scene, but were completely ignored. In fact, I actually went bankrupt because I had no work. But I had one mentor at that time that deeply inspired me, and that was one of your great alum, who is one of your great heroes and one of the heroes of the continent, Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan commissioned me to make a villa for him in the countryside. And he didn't need it, but I think he just saw pity on me and gave me this commission and allowed me to explore a way of making architecture which is the DNA of what now is the work that I'm doing. In that small project that I made outside Accra, I explored this idea of a disaggregated form of local, of climate, energy reduction, of the tonality and the cultural framing of our environment. And I hope that in these projects that now are emanating from Accra and going around the continent, you can see a story unfolding that I'm very excited about, that I'm very inspired by, to continue doing architecture and to expand the possibility of what architecture can do as this continent lifts up and takes its rightful place on the global stage. I will start with a small project, probably the first project that we did when we came back in 2019. And it was inspired by an amazing young artist called Amwako Boafo, one of the great young stars of Ghana right now, a painter who studied in Vienna and has come back. And what struck me in the conversations that he had with me at that time was his desire to make, in any small way that he could, deeply inspired by the work of artists like Kehinde Wiley and these other sort of much more major stars, a contribution to the art ecosystem in his home country, even though he was getting a lot of success everywhere else. He wanted to implant something back in his community. And I found it so deeply inspiring that a young artist who traditionally, as they become successful, would want to move to the West or anything like that, was actually deeply interested in building infrastructure because he couldn't see the infrastructure that he felt was needed in his own place. So this project for us was not economic. It was really a kind of trade between artists. And we wanted to create a project that would demonstrate in this community in La and Accra a way of seeing how, if political and institutional support was lacking, how could citizens, artists, creatives create and contribute towards an infrastructure and a dialogue about what we need in our societies and in our urban cities. This is just a sample of the work that the Dot Atelier, as it's become known, and it's more than one institution. He's building several institutions and working with different architects, which is deeply inspiring, has been doing in its community. The project brief was very simple. Can we make a space for artists to be inspired to work that could be from the local context, but also international? Could we make a space to show art? And could we make a space that artists could just convene? You know that gathering, in a university you think gathering is normal, but actually when you're in the world, you'll realize that gathering is one of the most radical things you can do. To gather with like-minded people and to be able to exchange ideas about the contemporary is one of the most precious things that we need in our societies, to exchange ideas with our peers and to hear each other's voices. So this project was not only just a studio and an exhibition space, but a gathering place and a library for the artist community. It's in the area that Nkrumah, as he was establishing his administration, cleared the communities there, sad and also the way in which the world was then, cleared what they thought were slums and created a new urban plan. It's one of the areas where a grid plan is established with bungalows that were made for the political communities that were growing. And now obviously has changed, that has completely changed. But it's one of the most interesting, vibrant areas that artists have gravitated towards in Accra. And this is the La area. This is just zooming in to give you a sense of where it is. Sort of in this area, which has really predominantly been about bungalows, there's now, as the land values have increased, a desire to, grow the heights, increase the opportunity of yield from the land. But here we wanted to make an institutional building that became a sort of, that would become a landmark that wasn't about the commerce that was erupting all around, but about cultural infrastructure that had the equivalent energy and power as the commercial enterprise around it. In a way, signaling to the community that it's not just about making money, but it's also about making something that contributes back to the community. This is just really the research that we did on the communities, the fishing villages that were there before, the clearances, the master plans. This is an area that has had a lot of thoughts in the founding of independent Ghana. And it's interesting to me when we were looking at this that they were modernist bungalows, but before that they were earth structures. And so we decided that we wanted to look at the communities of earth structures as well as the modern technology. In the work, always oscillating between the ancient and the future is my mantra to my team, that the work must seem at once completely new, but at once completely familiar. Inhabiting this dual world, for me, is the radicality of architecture. We looked at that and created a small tower. I call it a small tower pavilion project, which really is a study on air, light, view, and frame. On the ground floor, how you enter. In the middle, the studio body, the heart, and in the top, the showing space with all its light. We decided that we wanted to make a plan that was not a traditional plan. It would be something where the rooms would be singular. There would be no corridors in this building, to take away the corridor and to make the circulation, the system which organizes the way in which you arrive to each space as you rise. So on the ground floor, you enter library, cafe at the back, entry offices, etc., gatehouse, garden in the back. And then the rooms, and then you can see the perimeter is where the service systems and the circulation run, always creating a rectangular proportioned room in the heart. Then this is the form of the building from above. It's a frame building. I mean, I don't know if you know, but Accra is on a major earthquake fault line. So we can't just build anything we want. We have to build with a structure that is sustainable, but also able to deal with all the issues that could happen in the cycles that are inevitable in Accra. So it's a frame building, and I wanted to express that. And then the material body of it, the largest amount of area, is the lowest carbon material, the ancient material, the earth material, which is rammed, in this case, with hammers. And when we started this project, nobody was ramming or doing rammed earth in Accra, except for traditional people in the countryside. And we wanted to train a team who would start to really be able to scale up. And even before we had finished, the teams had started to leave to get other work. So we were training, people were excited, they were being poached, and they started to become artists, and everything started to happen. And it was amazing. For us, this was an incredible explosion, and something where we're now training a new generation of ram earth artisans. And for us, this expansion of these kinds of new models of construction is really important to creating an experimental nature, but also creating an environment where we are able to try and connect to other ways of construction beyond what we've been told are the standard models. This is the building in its context. So you can imagine in these bungalows, you see the gray building is the traditional building, or the white building behind it are the commercial architectures that are taking the area. And what we wanted to do was to create this new form. So even though there is no space in this planning for an institutional building, this is, because it's essentially residential, except for the church buildings which serve important nodes. This becomes another kind of institutional building, a small monument, as I call it, in that environment. The approach is very simple. It has one framing view to the environment. The materials are very basic. In a way, for me, enjoying the limits of the material opportunity was exciting. In a world where you can do anything you want, actually to have limits because of whatever you want to say, GDP or import problems, To be able to have limits can be an extraordinary accelerator. I trained with an architect called Alvaro Siza, and Alvaro Siza in Portugal would always talk about this time when Portugal was a very poor country, had come out from being in a fascist construction. They had no artisans, but he, unlike his fellow architects who were looking at everything around the world, would work with local people to train up skills, metalworking, plastering, rendering, and just use the limits to make expansion. We are always told limits are a problem, but actually creatives know that limits can create extraordinary expansion, and that can create radicality. The way in which the building works is that it's an open staircase, it's not enclosed. So it is working with this idea of the inside-outside, the tropical. It is not an enclosed system until you get to the rooms. In a way like our houses, which have their porches before the rooms, or our courtyard compounds, which have their open circulatory systems before the rooms. This is a vertical interpretation of the same idea. The studio where artists would work. The way in which it frames its context, giving you framing to where you are. The gallery up above, and sort of really reminding you that this is a building made out of earth, made out of rammed earth. And then it's zenithal lights, which allow the galleries to not have any need for electricity when the sun is rising and before the sun is set. You only need lights when the sun goes down, because we're on the equator and we keep forgetting. There's no reason for us to have buildings with lights. I always say to my teams, we should be able to design buildings that harvest natural light abundantly without solar gain. That is a basic of our environment. And then, whilst we were here working on projects around the world, we had the opportunity to work with a developer to develop an office project which we kept very quiet and which was unveiled this year. But we were in a refurbished building very near airports where we really were practicing from predominantly and building the infrastructure and the capabilities of the office. And then we got this commission to collaborate with this developer to then make our own office building. It's in the cantonments area of Accra. It's one of those sites that's on the circular system, so it sort of wedges and is a strange shape. The area of cantonments has become very, very expensive and very much a desired area, as you know. Very many different types of houses. It's kind of like, somebody said the Dubai of Accra. But for me, the memory of the center of Accra are these incredible models. The models that were trying to test what it was like to be in the climate, what it was like to elevate, to get the cross breezes from the ocean, what it was like to use structural intelligence to create efficiencies, what it was like to use material knowledge of local places to enhance and bed a narrative. So for me, I kind of wanted to, in a way, critique the environment by making a building that remembered the roots of how we started our modernity. And to understand that actually abstraction and minimalism, which is very fashionable in the West as being just Japanese, is actually a very African thing. Africans are exceptional at reduction, abstraction, tessellation, multiplication. We are the originators of this thing. So we look at it in Kente and think, yes, it's a Kente, it's Kente. It's not. It's actually the DNA of a way of simplifying complex ideas into incredible forms and structures that teaches us. And I think our ancestors did an incredible job of putting that information into everything. They didn't just put it into, these are the things for the future. They put it into combs, into dresses, into stools, into shrines. It was everywhere. So when we had our colonial erasure, we still had artifacts that have our intelligence. And I think that that's a model of resilience right there, telling you that there is an incredible intelligence in the absolute knowledge that comes from the people who've lived in this place for many generations. And there is an intelligence in understanding how, if that has worked for those generations, we can marshal that information to create an extraordinary future. This in the absence of the built environment that they made being erased, more or less. So this idea of making a building which uses structural efficiency, now low carbon concrete, not worried about the color of the concrete, but using local sands, sifting with them to bring the carbon footprint down, then using rammed earth as a dominant enclosure material became also the second test with this project on a commercial scale. So first was an art project, this is a commercial project. The ground floor we felt we couldn't afford to excavate, so we didn't want to excavate. So we decided to make a structure that would give us the most flexible ground plane. And that required us to develop a structure where I didn't want any columns on the ground. So with our engineers, we worked on bringing and developing the first post-tension structure, we think, in Accra, definitely. It's a 26-meter cantilever that sits on one column, that is an escape stair, and then the studios rise up above it. The main studio floors, 2 levels of it with service systems, and then the roof, which is our sort of amenities building. That has our creche, boardroom, sort of event spaces, etc. on the roof. The building basically orients north-south. And so the louvers are working east, sort of northeast and north, because of the angle, northeast and northwest, sort of dealing with the sort of solar glare in the morning and the evening. This is the front elevation, which is on the main street, sort of, you know, for me, I call this a very, actually, Ashanti building. And why do I say that? In the sense that it is, if you look at traditional Ashanti architecture, it's never porous when you face it. It actually is very enclosed first. It asks for you to be invited. And as you are invited, it starts to open itself out. It receives you into its courtyard, and it opens itself in. And for me, this idea of not making grandiose facades, but about creating a restraint, but a power, is something that I've been very fascinated with. Then the side elevations, which allow transparency, and then the building in its context. You can see the kind of building that's actually next door to us. That's the predominant image of architecture in cantonments. And then this arrives. And what we're trying to say, we're not trying to say that this is, you know, good or bad, but we're saying that there has to be another way of making architecture, which is not just about a sort of a complete a returning back always of models from other places, from Ibiza, from, you know, Dubai, etc. So we wanted to say, here's an architecture. Architecture can have traditional roots, be incredibly radically modern. It doesn't have to be mimetic, and it doesn't have to be something that looks like something from the past for it to be about the past. When you enter, you are in this yard, which we use as a flexible space. The ground floor is, in fact, an exhibition and small auditorium, which we're programming exhibitions and shows in, which will start to roll out in the fall. At the moment, it's a little space for us, for our models, but it's really getting ready as we're working with the Architecture Future, the AFI, the Architecture Futures Institute, to look at a program of exhibitions and talks that will roll out. And so the ground floor will be available for the public to be able to come to any time. The sort of veranda before the garden, our auditorium space with its rammed earth walls, our staircases that take us up, the service core, which is clad in indigenous timbers, and then our serving, the 2 spaces, the studio rooms and then the administrative spaces. This is the administrative spaces. And the studio spaces. The studios, you can see, have no lights on. It's something that seems like nothing, but it's really important to me, this idea that we make an architecture that really takes advantage of what some people think are the negatives. We have incredible lights that we can just use. In the evening, the lights go on. I'm the one who goes into the office every day and switch off the lights. Because people like to switch on the lights all the time. Because it's just, you come into the office, you switch on the lights. And we're saying, why are you switching on the lights? Can you not see? You shouldn't have to do that. Then the fin system, which is, you know, nearly 1 meter thick, 1 meter deep, and 0.5 meter thick. And these, you can see There is an enjoyment of the different geological nature of the Earths that we're sampling. There's no desire to try and hide that. The idea of the building's sort of atmosphere and color is not through its plasticity. I have no interest in the plasticity of a material. I'm interested in the material nature of geologies and how they express themselves. And when you use earth or stones, you have the incredible ability to create patinas that you just can't achieve when you're just trying to abstract everything out. Then dealing with shadow and light, this is the roof terraces with its teak sort of shade louvers. And then this is our communal area with the escape staircase in the center where we have views and breezes on the roof terrace. And then this is the building in its context. You can see the building next door. I always loved that we are next to this building, but it tells you everything about the context and the game. This is Accra now in cantonments, and you can see the ocean just behind, how close we are to the ocean. Then let's move to a project where we were brought in by the previous administration to when COVID happened in the world, and African countries were grappling with how to deal with the real issues of getting help to communities, especially remote communities. And the previous administration, with the Ministry of Health, thought through this idea, which they call the district hospitals. This is our infrastructure at the moment in many places. They thought through a brief for what could be a model of a low-cost hospital that could be deployed to every region in Ghana, allowing every community to be no more than half an hour away from a hospital. And to also allow for the drone technology, of which Ghana is actually quite an expert, to be able to deliver invaluable vaccines, etc., directly to communities with doctors and nurses in those communities able to administer and support and create resilience in our communities in the absence of the infrastructure that we don't have that would limit the ability to help people if things really got out of hand. COVID was bad, but it could get much worse. And this, for me, is an urgent issue that we have to deal with in Ghana. This was the mapping that was done with the Ministry of Health of all the communities across our nation and where a hospital had to be. And in the end, it came up to 111 hospitals, including those that exist right now that needed to be upgraded. And the idea was like a Marshall Plan, the American plan, was to then absolutely set up a scenario where we were commissioned to do a study where traditionally if I'm asked to make a hospital, I'm trying to think of a unique thing for each place. This was a project where I had to think of a hospital like a piece of infrastructure, almost not like a building, that actually becomes something that is deployed across the entire country. We developed a system based on a lot of analysis on speed of construction. We made a couple of decisions. Only one-story construction, a courtyard system that allowed a series of intimacy but also familiarity with communities, a series of simple buildings that only allowed sort of high-tech air conditioning where you needed them, but cross-ventilation being the predominant model, low-carbon concrete, earth brick architecture, compressed earth brick architecture, locally pressed from each area. So that the thinking was that in doing so, we could deploy up to 111 contractors around the country and actually just build this model. And within 3 to 5 years, have this across the entire nation. It's something which I know is possible. We actually did all the work and finished one model. And it is actually proven that you can do this. We could build hospitals for the entire nation in 5 years. It comes from this analysis of our culture, making one-story structures, understanding in threshold spaces, understanding climate moderation, understanding how to organize our spatial systems so that our communities understand it. From the informal to the palaces, the models are the same. Some of the studies thinking about this. Then the plan that was set out, these are 2-acre plots. And the idea was that we identified in all 111 locations 2-acre plots that were more or less within a 1 or 2, 3 meter gradient that allowed us to build this infrastructure. You have pediatric, accident and emergency, pharmacy, you have adult services, you have an infirmary, you have also the ability to have residences for doctors and nurses in training on site, and you have all the amenities that a hospital, an A&E, etc. So it is a micro hospital of about 100 beds for each, for male and female. We decided that some of the roofs, instead of being pitched, would be butterfly, because we needed to collect water. We didn't want to waste the resource of water. So water collection has become part of the ecology of this model, and then also solar energy production. So the butterflies collect energy and also collect water, but then creates its own unique language for the hospitals. So the diagram is very simple. Upside down or inverted, or where you need energy, as in the theaters and the operating spaces, etc., you have the technology into the body of the architecture, but always building a raft system that floats above the foundation so you don't have to worry about the topography too much. And then the rest of the systems evolve with the proportions that allows for thermal stack effects and heat gains to all work appropriately. We tested it in different locations as diagrams, and we built one. This is built and is ready to be operated. The front is the entire hospital program. At the back is the residences for the community. And this can be built for every single community in Ghana. This is using local skills, not highly skilled contractors, but local contractors who are able to make these compressed bricks and make these frames, and to then embed within it the technologies we've just been discussing. Entrance areas. There are no corridors. You will start to find I hate corridors unless if I have to do it. Wards, courtyards where trees will be planted as waiting spaces, solar systems on roofs, water gathering and solar systems with the earth brick and frame, the corridors where the natural ventilation happens, and corridors to interconnect the systems. Then these forms with their different roof profiles and how they articulate, accident and emergency areas, and then this building in its context as it's starting to grow with this residential area behind. For me, this is probably one of the most meaningful projects that I completed, and I hope that governments will look at the work that architects are doing and vast teams, and really, for me, build upon the work that's been done rather than discard this kind of research for new models. Because when we make breakthroughs, it's important that that's actually shared with our communities. Another project that we working on during this time, which is another scale, is the Museum of West African Arts. It's called MOA, Museum of West African Arts in Benin. And this project really started off first as a conversation about how do we deal with the restitution of our artifacts and objects which were taken in the colonial plunder, which happened. And, you know, the directors of this institute came to me and said, David, what the argument that's always placed in front of us is that we have no infrastructure that can receive these objects. So how can we even be in a conversation about restitution when we haven't even built the infrastructure for that? So I said, well, this is where architecture is powerful. Let us demonstrate institutional spaces that these objects could come to, and let us also demonstrate infrastructure that can train generations of custodians of curatorial sort of projects, but also historical restoration, archaeologists who will start to value our history and to be the custodians and the caregivers for that. This project then, from being about creating an art institution, very quickly became very focused in being able to allow for the works to come back to the continent. This idea of proving that we could make an infrastructure that could support it became the paramount discussion. So how to make this infrastructure that would support the return and allow a sort of dialogue to happen, and then from that to be able to grow from it, cultural institutions, once we start training, once we start receiving our cultural patrimony, start training our teams and our generations to be able to be the custodians of creating institutions that will show this work from our own continent back out to the world, rather than the world looking at it and holding it and showing it back to us. And if you're not able as an African to travel to the West, never being able to see your ancestors' artifacts. So another project of injustice that really moved me in the studio, and we really got behind this project to really push it. We designed the project more or less almost pro bono, I think. My CEO will tell me. And it managed to get published in the New York Times because they couldn't believe an African office would do this. So it exploded the conversation. It was happening in France, the US got involved, and the whole thing started to become a very powerful conversation. And then the political parties started to get involved. It started to erupt into politics. The sad thing for us is that the politics, rather than marshalling and being an agent to sharpen this spear that has been made, to accelerate this effort, became a moment of division about who did what and who justifies what. All very important conversations, but ones that really, for me, I'm sad, became a kind of impediment into the story of this project. I mean, what is fascinating is that MOA is probably now one of the most famous museums in the world that's not built. That is not built. But I think that in a weird way, it's also become a model that is saying, that has activated an awareness on the continent that we need to claim and make our own futures from our past. Images of the colonial plunder, the burning of palaces, and literally the looting of extraordinary centuries of work, and then being told that these are devil-worshipping objects, so we should not look at them. Our history and our heritage. For me, this kind of language that is propagated around this work is unconscionable. These are the artifacts of our ancestors. We need to respect and understand what they are and grow from them. They're tropes for the future. They're not things to do with anything to do with evil, but to do with our futures. The architecture of Benin, one of the most beautiful cities in Africa, probably at that time. 1,000-year-old city, as old as London is now, that had lights, street lights, had roots, had built the biggest network of rammed earth in the world, more than the Great Wall of China. Everybody thinks the Great Wall of China is where it starts. Benin built more earthen walls than China. They were destroyed. There was a sense that how could these people, how could we go and say we're taking things from these people if they are so sophisticated and so extraordinary in their architecture and their cities? So we have to be careful about the stories about our artifacts and the stories that we consume about our own histories. So the building project, which is essentially a warehouse for storage, becomes more than that. It becomes a moment to use construction to create a cultural infrastructure. It is a place for exhibition, for archaeologists to work, a place to display things, to have lectures, and a community center for the community to be able to gather, and a place to remember the walls of Benin, the curving walls. Benin's walls were radial. They were circumferences that went around the city in radiuses that talked about the different hierarchies and layers. I mean, an extraordinary, almost sci-fi image of what a city should look like was made in the ancient world. And we are looking for futures and models that are so not even close to the radicality of our ancestors. So for me, this making of a warehouse was to become much more than that. It had to demonstrate this technology of curving rammed earth systems as a kind of memory, and then to become this moment of future and ancient technologies woven together. This warehouse is really a technological engine because it has to keep material at a stable temperature. So let's just go into it. Let me show you. This is the master plan of the campus. The building itself. So the beige became, we dedicated a whole area to exhibition and public areas with auditoriums and offices around it. The gray is the loading docks, the archaeological spaces, the hard engine of the building. And then the central square is the archive storage boxes that allow us to be able to repatriate thousands of objects in this one little building. We can repatriate thousands of objects into this building. And we said that we wanted to repatriate them, but also create a relationship with the public. So the public face, which is at the front, has a glass front to the archive, so that the archive, as it's being built and being returned, is also visible to the public. People can see the things being brought back. So this is this building and these curving walls that people say, why is it curving? It's just speaking to these fragments to try and activate a memory. And then the section in the center, using northern light to bathe it in what it needs. That's the environmental diagram. It uses earth roof to insulate, to help us bring our energy loads down. We collect our water. You know, the whole idea of sort of biophilic and green design is just to be built into architecture. It's not something to celebrate. It's actually something that's normal. We should not be thinking that that means we've achieved anything. That means you've just become normal. And then from that, what else do you do? And a moment, if this is a community garden, I'm always obsessed with the idea that we create arboretums, places where all the plant life of our communities are seen, that our gardens are not just ornamental, but also educational. What grows here? How can we talk to communities about that? The thing that is the machine that is usually in between the floor of a ceiling and a slab, we put on top, so that it is a system that can easily be accessed and changed, can be worked with without disturbing the architecture of the warehouse. So this engine sits on top of this ancient system, like these two worlds colliding. And then these pavilions that allow you to come in, which are these low-carbon concrete structures. The entrance with its rammed earth walls. So this curvilinear, amazing, sort of, for me, this, you know, childlike romanticizing of what Benin was. Because right now, Benin is full of rectangles. There are no curved buildings anymore. And then the public area. This is an area that anybody is able to go to. And the Ministry of Culture brought artifacts from their archive that they've never shown anywhere to this building, because we finally made an infrastructure that could support it. And the most beautiful objects from the archives in Nigeria are now on display in this building. Incredible bronze castings, incredible ceramic and pottery that the community, people just don't know. As beautiful as anything in the world, in the British Museum or the Louvre or anywhere, just in this little building. And then these are the archive storage containers. So the idea is that you're looking from the glass room into this space, it's always lit, and these elements will be placed in there. The glass has UV filters, so the light will not affect the artifacts. The glass is UV filtered, so anybody thinks, oh gosh, it's going to be lit, please. Then the offices and spaces, the internal rooms, the skin. This was amazing getting the rammers. These rammers are not with robots or anything. This is just hammers, bashing. So this is low skill craftsmen. But still you can make high architecture, I believe. And then let me take you to the last three projects. The project that we are very excited about, that we've been working on for about 7 years or 8 years, 7 years, the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library. We unveiled it a few years ago, but because of COVID and many things, it stalled. But this year, we've broken ground, and in 2.5 years, this center will open. This is in South Africa. This is our first major project in South Africa. And it's for this incredible man, who was a young man next to the incredible Nelson Mandela, and has really, I think, encapsulated the sort of intellectual power of what was the ANC, but the independence movement that finally liberated South Africa. And one of the great honors of my life has been getting to know this man over the past 7 years and listening to him talk about the African Renaissance. He's obsessed with the African Renaissance. For him, he sees a future that he knows he will not be in, but he wants to see a future where African knowledge and Africanness is as worthy as anything else. I mean, what a thing that our generation has to suffer and burden, to just be yourself. So this entire project of Thabo Mbeki, when he finished his presidency and he was told that he could have a presidential library, he moved it away from it being about a presidential library. He said, I don't need a library just to honor me. That's not interesting to me. But I need a library that will honor the next generations and will give them inspiration. And some of the things he did when he left the presidency was to become one of the most powerful forces on our continent to deal with our archives of independence. The Thabo Mbeki Foundation has now probably the largest archive of independence movements on our continent, something which is thrown away in most governments on our continent and discarded. This group has been meticulously buying at auction, collecting these documents, constitutional drafts, things that were said, and collecting them and making an extraordinary archive which is going to be in the center. This library, this presidential library, is actually going to be a center of the archives of the continent. It's in an area that he lives in, and he has systematically over, I think the last decade, bought an entire urban block, quietly. And now it is being transformed. This is just a little red area, but that entire urban black rectangle now belongs to the foundation. So phase 1 is what we're working on now, which is in the red, which is the presidential library, and it's one of its archive buildings. It's in an area that is a very leafy residential area full of modernist buildings, shopping malls. It's near Sandton. It's in a it's Riviera, if you know South Africa and that part of South Africa. A very sort of up-and-coming, not up-and-coming, a very arrived upper middle class area. We said, after listening to this incredible man for with many conversations, what you're proposing is like the technology that allowed our ancestors to survive the harshest environments. So actually, this thing that you're asking us to make is actually a grain silo. And he laughed. And we said, we're super serious. For me, one of the greatest sciences of our indigenous communities is the way in which they develop grain silos to allow agriculture, to allow communities to flourish. It is it's the iPhone of the past time. It's how you can survive in a mountainscape or in the desert where there's ravishing heat. So I said, this piece of technology is a metaphor of knowledge transfer, knowledge, innovation, etc. And I said, the building had to reference this. Could we reference this as our thinking? That we would not make a large flexible space, but a series of silos that would be one-room systems, each one with one program, that would become the environment for discussing the continent's futures. So in the end, the plan was to create 8 chambers on a plinth, elevated, and to create a series of sequences that, we have worked with this foundation to finally get right. and now we are building it. These volumes in their roofs are cut with zenithal light apertures. You know me and my obsession with light. So that each volume is illuminated by a different quality of zenithal light, east, west, north, south, direct sunshine, indirect, reflected light. The podium creates the infrastructure, the engine, the water collection, the management. The sun deals with all the kind of solar harvesting that we need. The thermal mass of these buildings are both rammed earth and compressed brick. So we make a double thick structure it has a frame inside because South Africa also is in an earthquake zone. So we can't make just earth architecture because it will fall. So it has a concrete frame, which is then lined with a rammed earth outer skin and a brick compressed inner skin. So this double wall system is the architecture of this building that's coming, with these program rooms, and underneath them are the exhibition spaces and offices and storage and support material for the center. It's all made of the earth of Riviera. This is the color of the earth underneath the concrete. We're not exporting this or bringing it, importing it from somewhere. It is what's there. This is the infrastructure of the ground that supports it, and then this is then the silos on top. So the material palette of this project is basically different strengths of earth, either going towards concrete or coming towards just compressed mud. It's a language of just one material. From the street, this is what it's going to look like on the corner. As you approach it from the front, as you enter, you then see how the different chambers intersect with each other, and the zenithal light falls. Each one has different programs talking about the history of the continent. This is an orientation room to tell you what you will come to see. Libraries for academic study. Auditoriums for presentations. Digital museums talking about stories for communities. In-between spaces where people can gather and just meet each other. The lower section where the exhibition areas are, the exhibition spaces, and then as you come off the plinth, a sort of large amphitheater outdoor space, and this from the street. And then this is phase one. The long lozenge building is actually the space where the digitizing of the archives of the continent is happening. And then this is the engine, which is the display and the discussion and the meeting space for those archives. So we're very excited that by 2028, we'll be able to hopefully join me and we go and visit this building. And then I want to talk about a project which is very controversial in our country. Because I can't let the elephant be in the room. There's no point. And I know that this project has caused a lot of heartache with lots of people. But let me just tell you how we thought about it, because I don't think anybody has given us a chance to explain what this project is for us as architects. Again, from the previous administration, the idea of creating in Ghana, when I actually found out the actual research, to create not just a cathedral, I think if you just think of it just like that, you miss it. What has become very clear is that there are many forms of tourism in the world. The one that we all think about is holidays and whatnot. That has many difficult issues with it in terms of how it creates tensions within your communities, etc. But one of the most enduring and most productive injection of GDP into a country is religious tourism. In case you did not know, what do you think the Vatican is? Let me just remind everyone, because people say, oh, cathedral, who needs that? There is a 2,000-year history now of going to places that are centers of worship that are about the place. that are about the place and the special nature of the place. And the tourists who go are very diverse economically and are very respectful. You want those kind of people visiting your country. You want those kind of people coming from the continent in different places. If you're going to create engines of economic uplift, this is a great model, more than concerts for music. Let me tell you, the maths is clear. Anybody who knows this, the maths is very clear. When we saw the data, we were like, wow, this is a must for our country. But we said, you can't just make a cathedral. You have to make something that contributes to Accra, that contributes to the community, and uplifts and adds something more. The questions we ask about every project. You obviously know where it is. I don't need to tell anyone here. This is a nice thing about talking in Ghana. What was great was that the site was meant to be a quarter of what you see. And we argued with the administration that since independence, there has not been one designed biophilic park garden in the capital city. Not one has been built since independence. And that's the one next to it, which is left to fall apart and occasionally has things in it. Biophilic design, nature spaces, when we densify, Accra is plus 5 million people now, becomes a critical requirement for the comforts and the humanity of people. We don't live in concrete. We live with nature. We said this cathedral could activate a second park. So that was number 2. And the administration understood, so we expanded what would now just be concrete buildings to become the largest central area next to the parliament, next to the park, almost making the zigzag of greenery in the center of Accra. It creates a green band vertically along Independence, then down to Parliament, and then the Parliament landscape and cemeteries. This would be a massive asset for us without clearing out and trying to design a park like Houseman or something and destroying places. People could enjoy this as an asset. So the cathedral will then activate another thing, this opportunity. And then finally we said, if you're going to make this center, which will have all this religious study, education and social support is critical. How do we make it a place where business communities will want to go to this cathedral and use it? It can't just be for the religious community. It has to be for the communities in Accra to want to use it. It also has to be a place where people want to get married. So there has to be chapels in there that can create revenue, that you don't have to do it all in halls or yards. There must be a way that you should be able to use the central cathedral. So we made a hybrid idea of a cathedral. In fact, I would say it's hybrid, but actually it learns from, if you look at the history of cathedrals around the world, they sort of become what this is now, what we want to do as a new model. It has a music school, it has a library, it has chapels for smaller services, it has a conference center, it has a Bible museum to talk about the Ghanaian roots and African roots of Christianity, because a lot of people don't know that. Who translated the first Bibles into Twi, etc., etc. People don't know. There's a whole history that's invisible to most Ghanaians. And then also, for me, to talk about this idea of the infrastructure of independence and of our growth from independence into the future. And to connect to our past. What is an architecture of reverence? And you guys know it. This is the central space of that. I said that if, the reverence that we give to our kingship is the same reverence we give to God, right? The deity, our deity, the way in which we honor our kingship is, if you look at a church, it's the same kind of model. So in a way, the Bowman festivals, the revealing on Sunday of the royalty, all these things actually give us the blueprint for what an architecture of a religious space could look like. The shade, the revealing of space, the hierarchy of structures, etc. So we said, let's use science and engineering and this to create a form that would be uniquely from our culture. So this idea of a layering of chambers, again, another plinth building, a mound that would be made with a earth composite that would create the base, and then a structural system that would create a tension structure, almost like a fabric of the Bowman umbrellas, creating a cover for up to 5,000 people to gather. And then the two parks, the park to Parliament and the park to Independence Avenue for the community. The building actually looks like you enter it from above, but actually you enter it from Castle Road, directly in. Underneath it, parking, and then at the lowest level, a crypt for the heroes of our nation. We have incredible losses in our country of great people, and we put them under tents, and we bury them in military cemeteries. We could make a crypt in this building that could hold our heroes that we revere. We could then make the museums, the conference centers, the support facilities, the chapels that are on the ground floor to allow for daily life to inhabit the ground plane from Castle Road into this infrastructure. Then up above it, libraries, music school, support facilities. Then up above that, the chapel itself facing east as a semicircle facing east, so it goes across the system that can hold the 5,000 people in its spaces. Then the structure, which spans 40 meters, it would be the first superstructure beam in the country. So engineering excellence that we've never seen before, of the kind that Independence Ghana started. To go back to that incredible way of thinking, that we have a need. Why do we want the columns? We don't want them. Let's use science to solve it. Let's create these extraordinary beams with our engineers. We've created a beam system that is made in pieces that joins together to create this incredible superstructure. That is not a Miro super space frame. It is an actual architecturalized beam. The mezzanine. And each of these folds in the roof is a beam. These are the beams that support the building, and then they're held between. And the gaps between the differential that's happening because the highest point in the center is the altar, and the lowest point is the door, creates the clerestories to light the entire chamber without needing, again, my pet thing, incandescent light. Then the gardens. This could be an extraordinary arboretum of extraordinary gardens that speak about our civic life, our political life, our cultural life. And then the funny thing about the building is that it looks, you think it's a small building, it actually would be the tallest building in Accra. It would be the highest building in Accra because the podium comes up to elevate the form so that everywhere in Accra you would see this cathedral. It would become a symbol of a nation that's 70% Christian. The mound would then become outdoor auditoriums in the Tutu Gardens. We love our nightlife. So then you can get up to 25,000 people on this mound. Up to 25,000 people could gather in this place in different events. It'd be one of the most extraordinary things in the world. There's nothing like it in the world. It would make a unique destination in Ghana, in Accra. Let me show you an animation we made. Thank you. So then lastly, let me just show you a project that we also just completed in the capital city for the Bank of Ghana, and I'll leave you there. I think I've taken enough of your time. Let's just quickly talk about this project and then we can maybe have a conversation. We were also then commissioned through a competitive tender with a contractor that we went in with. The government had a competitive tender for a project to build the new headquarters for the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana's headquarters, if you'd been to the old offices, thinking about all the things that they're dealing with, trying to stabilize our economy and borrow money and also kind of create the status of an economic strength in the world. If you went to their offices, you would be saddened. What was built in the 50s had become dilapidated, half occupied, because it was ridden with so many problems. And so the opportunity to create a new Bank of Ghana project was held as a competitive tender, and the contracting team, Gold Key, won the tender, and we were their local architect for the project. Our idea was very simple. A lot of people proposed very glassy Dubai buildings. We said, please, can we make a building where we want to show discipline, order, care, and a relationship to where we come from as the foundational notion of what this building is. This is a building that you have to come to and say, I want to give you people $1 billion. Right? Somebody has to come here and say, I trust you guys. You know what you're doing. This is not a building to start dancing. So you can see that there's a political nature behind this project that is really important. And for us, we thought this is about how what we've been talking about in the office, making an architecture and infrastructure of nation building, but also continent building. This was this is a very powerful example. So the project for us is moved to basically the CDB area in Accra now, which is just off Castle Road, coming up the hill behind 37 in North Ridge, just close to North Ridge. Obviously, you know downtown where the old building was, next to the center, and then the CDB is the upper images where the new towers are coming out in Accra. We said, how do Africans make towers? Can we look at that? Actually, in my heart, I actually wanted to make a rammed earth tower, but I pushed it too far. But I will make a rammed earth tower. Or if I don't, somebody here has to. Please. We can't just have towers that are not. Our ancestors already made rammed earth towers. To a person in the 14th century or 13th century, that was a skyscraper. So we can do it. We said, instead of making one big building, why don't we make an agglomeration of buildings that have a language but shifts, like the mosques, like the villages, like the palaces, that shifts in language to do with the form, and then to distribute the form to do with the different parts of the program, general staff, executives, the banking hall, the support infrastructure. And let's make this a language that sits on the skyline with a certain silhouette that will be very different to the architecture around it. In a way, the banks and the commercial buildings around it on this site are performing for attention from customers to say, we're the new thing, come to us, save with us, we're cool. The Bank of Ghana needs to say, we are your stability, we are your anchor, we are the reason all this other stuff is happening. So we wanted to make an architecture that was completely different to the environment and spoke about this order. The site is developed, again, as a series of sections. This is the section where the banking hall and the safes, etc., are managed. I will not show you the plans. Then next, the support infrastructure that connects to that. And then lastly, the car parking and support material around it. And then the 3 towers, the 3 buildings that come off from that. One, an urban building that registers the scale of the CDB with its infrastructure. It's almost like the building's like a history of Accra. The low buildings, the earlier buildings, the mid-building blocks, and then the new urban buildings that are happening, and then finally the tower, which is the future. It's almost like a story registering the archaeology and the growth of Accra and creating a compression, a density that makes a financial city in the top of the hill. This is the building in its context. So now, in its context now, you can see the references to the existing architecture, the scales, and this new form. This is now the tallest tower in Accra. Not in terms of floor, but in terms of height. It stratifies, and each form gently tapers, acknowledging that initial history I talked about. As the section rises, it steps in, but it's very subtle, so that actually the form looks correct, like the old mosques. But actually, if you were to make it straight, it would start to kind of feel bigger at the top. So every form is stepping in gently, and then every form has a stone ledge to deal with water and shade, to create mass and form that deals with the environmental issues that the building has to develop. I wanted to make as thick a facade as possible to bring down the energy use of the building, and one of the ways was to create the elevations deep on the inside, but also to create these ledges, which means that the southern exposure and the east and west exposures are being mitigated as much as possible. The fourth element is an empty structure, which sits there like a ruin, and it's meant to be basically a space where staff can come and hang out, but also it's the largest auditorium for the bank. The entire staff can go and sit there, and they have discussions under the shade. All the buildings have solar cells on top. This is the first LEED Gold building in Ghana. So it is, performs, and from an energy point of view, it is sealed. It's, it doesn't have leaks. It's probably the most state-of-the-art building, definitely in the region, I would say in West Africa. The smallest building is actually an amenities building, so it's an auditorium conferencing facility. It's not finished yet. It will be finished in the next year or so. The canopy for gathering with its mirrored ceiling. It's a cross-concrete frame system. From the back, looking back towards the CDB. The plaza that's elevated for the staff members between the towers. The space between and the planting that's happening, which will grow. The gaps between and the way in which you get these vistas to the city. The skylights that drop in light into the banking halls. The banking hall. This is the main banking hall of the Bank of Ghana with Ghanaian mahogany. It has a mosque. This is a mosque inside the building. It has a church inside the building. The main lobbies from the car parks. The offices for inside the towers with the perforated ceiling system that allows us to not have many things there, just lights. This is a gauze system that allows extraction to happen efficiently. The window-to-wall ratio is about 40% glass, so we're in the right range for energy efficiency. The breakout spaces, boardrooms, next, and then the tower and its landscape. I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you.